Welcome to Talk Tickers. You're looking for the essential insights from today's earnings calls, and that's what we deliver. Today, we're diving into the latest from Oaklow. They're focused on advanced nuclear tech. We'll break down the key takeaways for you.
Okay, so diving right in. For Q1 2025, Oaklow reported an operating loss. It was $17.9 million.
And that includes some non-cash items.
Yeah, about $2.3 million in stock-based compensation was in there. Their loss before income taxes came in at $14.2 million. That's after factoring in about $3.6 million in net interest income.
Okay. And cash flow, how much did they actually spend?
Cash used in operations for the quarter was $12.2 million.
Got it. But they're sticking to their full-year plan, right?
They are. They reaffirmed the 2025 guidance, expecting total cash used in operations to be somewhere between $65 and $80 million.
And their cash position, still looking okay.
Seems solid. They finished the quarter with $260.7 million in cash and marketable securities.
Okay. And just a housekeeping note, their AGM is set for June 4th, 2025. So beyond those numbers, what was the bigger picture from the call? What really jumped out?
Well, the big theme was momentum.
Yeah.
Strong and accelerating momentum for nuclear energy. You see it in the industry and definitely in the political landscape. They stressed that the current administration seems to be clearly prioritizing nuclear.
Right. I saw that mention of a presidential letter. Placing nuclear alongside AI and quantum, that's pretty high praise.
It definitely signals strong support. And it looks like it's moving beyond just words. Oaklow talked about recent executive orders, things aimed at regulatory reform, streamlining permitting, which is always a bottleneck.
Yeah, permitting can take forever.
Exactly. And setting up a federal task force specifically for next-gen nuclear deployment. Even actions to revoke, like outdated barriers and fast-track projects.
And there might be more coming down the pike.
That was the hint. Potential future executive orders being looked at. One idea floated was quadrupling the U.S. nuclear fleet by 2050.
Quadrupling. Wow, that's ambitious.
Very. And also maybe classifying some data centers as defense critical infrastructure. Think about the power needs there.
Interesting angle. And getting the Department of Defense more involved.
Precisely. That could mean more DoD procurement, maybe even wholesale revisions of NRC regulations for defense needs, and crucially, rebuilding domestic fuel supply chains.
And they mentioned Secretary Wright, the former Oaklow board member, is a big proponent.
Yeah, a vocal champion for expanding nuclear. It all adds to that feeling of momentum.
Okay, so with all this potential support, how's Oaklow positioning itself? What makes them competitive in this landscape?
They laid out sort of three main advantages. First, their business model. It's build, own, operate.
So they don't just sell the reactors, they sell the power.
Exactly. They sell power under long-term contracts. The goal is predictable, recurring revenue, and maybe a slightly easier regulatory path because they're the operator.
Makes sense. What about the second pillar?
Sizing. They're focused on small-scale modular designs. Think faster deployment, more flexibility to scale up or down.
And that probably helps with manufacturing, too.
Right. They can leverage existing supply chains, use factory fabrication, could bring costs down eventually.
And the third point, the technology itself.
It's based on proven, liquid, metal-cooled, fast reactor tech. They highlighted like over 400 reactor years of operational experience with similar designs.
So it's not experimental.
Not really. They see performance and safety benefits, and importantly, it lets them aim directly for commercialization with their Aurora Powerhouse design. No need for a separate demo plant first.
That's a big claim, skipping the demo phase. What progress are they actually making on the ground? Project execution?
They mentioned completing a big drilling campaign at their proposed Idaho National Lab site, the INL site.
Gathering data for the license application.
Yep. Seismic geophysical studies, all that data feeds into the combined license application, the CLA, that they need to submit to the NRC.
And speaking of licensing, how's that going? Always a huge factor.
They've finalized key agreements, a memorandum of agreement with the Department of Energy, an interface agreement with INL itself. That's important groundwork.
And interactions with the NRC.
They've started phase 1 of what they call a pre-application readiness assessment for the Aurora plant at INL.
Okay, what does that involve?
It's basically trying to get on the same page with the NRC about the scope and expectations before they submit the formal COA. They're expecting an audit report back from the NRC with feedback.
Proactive. Trying to smooth the path.
Seems like it. They see this as testing key repeatable licensing pathways. They also mentioned the NRC recently approved a construction exemption for TerraPower's Natrium plant, which they view as a positive precedent.
Okay, let's talk fuel and recycling. Critical pieces.
They're getting close to submitting the licensing plan for their own Oaklow fuel foundry.
Making their own fuel.
That's the plan. And they've submitted a topical report to the NRC about licensing operators differently, potentially monitoring multiple powerhouses from one central spot.
Interesting. And the actual fuel supply, the HALEU.
For the first plant, they've got it secured, working with Halo. And they signed an MOU with Centrus, the only domestic HALEU producer right now for future plants.
Good. And recycling.
They're actively developing in-house recycling capabilities too. Plus, a big win. They got selected as a qualified vendor for the DoD's Advanced Nuclear Power for Installations program, ANPI.
What does that mean, practically?
It offers a potentially faster contracting route using something called Other Transaction Authority, or OTA, streamlined process.
Sounds significant. What about customers? Who wants these reactors?
Their pipeline is apparently over 14 gigawatts now. That's quite large, spans different sectors. Data centers definitely mentioned, also defense.
14 gigawatts is a lot of potential demand. Any new partnerships?
They're formalizing some new ones to support the INL work. And a big strategic move, they acquired a company called Atomic Alchemy.
Why? What do they do?
Radioisotopes.
Yeah.
It's a way for Oaklow to enter that high-growth market. They want a vertically integrated domestic supply using a proprietary reactor called Viper.
So diversifying beyond just power generation?
Exactly. They're even talking about potential revenue from a lab demo project maybe as early as 2026, with a full commercial Viper facility aiming for 2028.
Interesting pivot. And financially, just to reiterate,
They stress they're staying disciplined, transparent on cash burn and expenses, sticking to the guidance.
any leadership shuffles?
Yep. Pat Schwager joined as Chief Technology Officer, and Sam Altman stepped down from the board
Oh, why?
to avoid potential conflicts of interest. Apparently, commercial talks with OpenAI are advancing. Jake Ditt took over as chairman.
Got it. Let's quickly hit supply chain confidence. Always a concern these days.
They seem pretty confident, said the design leans heavily on existing supply chains, both nuclear and non-nuclear.
What about lead times?
For most non-fuel stuff, they said around 18 months. Fuel, of course, remains the big focus area they're actively managing. Mentioned Siemens for the steam generation side.
And fuel procurement beyond the first plant?
As we said, the first plant's fuel is sorted via INL and DOE. For the next ones, talks are ongoing with Centrus and others. They're trying to structure long-term deals, maybe even involving customer partnerships.
How do they see rolling out more plants? Submitting more license applications?
They expect it to be sort of staggered, but in parallel with the INL one, submit more CKLAs while the first is progressing. They hope the NRC review process gets faster over time, benefiting the later applications.
Expecting more under review soon then.
Yeah, they anticipate having additional CKLAs under review within the next year or so.
Does their current cash cover just the first plant or more?
They said the current balance sheet is adequate for deploying the INL plant, but they acknowledged, a growing order book, potentially larger designs.
Yeah.
That'll take more capital per unit down the line.
So future funding needs are expected.
Yes, but they framed it as positioning for growth. Future capital raises will be strategic, not reactive, because they're running out of cash.
Okay, that Viper facility for isotopes, different license, right?
Yeah. Correct. It uses a Part 50 license, like research reactors, not for power. It's a two-step process. Construction permit, then operating license. Should be simpler than the Part 52 for power reactors.
And the main power plant CLLA submission timeline, still October-ish.
That's still the target, aligning with the Advance Act, though they did add a caveat that potential executive orders could shift things. They expect Phase 1 submittal a few months after the readiness feedback, Phase 2 and Q4.
What about licensing the fuel foundry, the place making the fresh fuel?
That's a different path, again, more focused on materials handling, not reactor operation. They figure a full review might take 24 to 36 months. Still looking at sites.
Is that foundry scalable like the reactors?
Not quite in the same way because of the different regulations, but lessons learned should carry over. They expect the first one will be fairly large. Multiple locations are a maybe long-term.
You mentioned drilling data earlier. What exactly does that inform?
It feeds into the detailed engineering design, mostly for the building itself, its stability, making sure everything's engineered correctly for the specific ground conditions at the site. Also supports a regulatory case, obviously.
When they apply for a license, do they specify the exact reactor size, like 75 megawatts?
They're mostly focusing the generalized design around that 75 megawatt thermal range. But they have flexibility to go lower if a customer needs less power. The analysis generally covers the smaller sizes too.
And each site needs its own license.
Yes. The Idaho plant, interestingly, will likely run below 75 megawatts initially because of current fuel constraints. They're working on getting more fuel.
Quick clarification. The fuel foundry makes fresh fuel. What about using recycled fuel?
Good question. The foundry they discussed is specifically for fresh fuel fabrication. They have separate plans for a fuel recycling facility that would handle the used fuel and fabricate new fuel from the recycled material.
Ah, okay. 2 different facilities.
Right. And the recycling one will handle hotter stuff, literally and figuratively, more radioactive, more complex. They've apparently been working on the regulatory side for that since 2021.
Would the recycling facility cost more and take longer to build than the fresh fuel foundry?
Expected to, yes.
Yeah.
More capital, longer timeline. It's just more complex. They didn't give specific CapEx numbers yet, said it was premature.
What about the impact of those potential executive orders or more DoD involvement? Could that really move the needle?
Oh, yeah. Could be very meaningful, especially on the fuel side, leveraging national assets. And maybe alternative regulatory paths through DOE or DoD could speed things up.
How so?
Well, they already have a site use permit in Idaho. That's a head start. Their partnership with Centrus is on DOE land in Ohio. The AMPI program offers that faster contracting.
Yeah.
Government potentially owning the fuel material is another big factor. It could unlock things.
And what about data center customers? Are those talks real?
Seems like it. They mentioned active discussions, exchanging term sheets, talking commercial details with data center operators and hyperscalers.
What are the sticking points?
Sounds like the usual suspects. Optimizing the power purchase price, maybe getting the customer to invest in Oaklow itself, sharing risks. They've even hired someone specifically for data center business development.
Does that tie into permitting, getting sites ready?
Absolutely. The permitting strategy has to link up with the contracting strategy. They need sites identified beyond Idaho before they can file for more permits there.
Okay, wrapping up the core discussion, it sounds like Oaklow is navigating a complex but potentially very rewarding path with significant policy wins potentially at their back.
That's a fair summary. Progress on multiple fronts: tech, licensing, fuel, customers, even the isotope diversification.
Yeah.
But still lots of execution needed.
All right, let's pivot to our This Is Not Financial Advice segment. We digest all this and spin out an outrageous but plausible trade idea, purely for thought provocation, of course. So you've got this accelerating nuclear momentum, right? Potential big government push, DoD involvement, huge power needs from AI data centers. Oaklow is trying to deploy reactors near term.
Okay, here's one for you. Consider a company that doesn't make reactors, doesn't generate power, but is crucial for this whole ecosystem. Think about specialized high-performance computing hardware, optimized for complex nuclear reactor simulation and fuel cycle modeling.
Interesting. Not the obvious play.
Right. The idea is, as companies like Oaklow push forward, and as the government potentially mandates more domestic fuel development and recycling, the need for extremely powerful specialized computing to model, simulate, and optimize these complex processes will surge.
So you're betting on the picks and shovels for the nuclear renaissance's digital twin.
Sort of. It's a niche, but potentially high-growth supporting sector. If advanced nuclear really takes off, designing, licensing, and managing these new reactors and fuel cycles efficiently will require massive computational power. This targets that specific bottleneck.
Outrageous but plausible. And remember, everyone, this is purely speculative, just a thought exercise based on the call. It is absolutely not financial advice. Do your own detailed research before making any investment decisions.
Definitely. Do your homework.
So that was our deep dive into Oaklow's latest earnings call. We've hit the results, the strategy, the potential future directions in this fast-moving energy space. What stood out most to you? What questions linger? We really encourage you to dig into the details yourself and think about the wider implications. Thanks for tuning in to Talk Tickers. Join us again next time for another earnings call breakdown.